Intellivision, the intelligent home video system. Intellivision turns your TV set into a family entertainment center. Television.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Player One Start. Today we're actually going to follow up on a video series that I did very early on this channel, and that is my Atari vs. Intellivision series. Looking back on those videos, you can tell that I've made many changes to how I do videos on this channel. And to tell you the truth, those videos I consider to be a huge learning experience. Number one, I found out that if I say anything critical of a console that someone grew up with back in the 80s, apparently they get very offended, and that was definitely not my intention. I just wanted to kind of give my perspective and put things out there. The biggest thing that I was critical of was the controller design. It's just something that I didn't find intuitive. To me, I felt it was more of a chore playing games on there than it was fun to play. But again, that's just my perspective. As a result of me disclosing this opinion in those videos, I have been contacted several times by various gamers that perhaps I would enjoy playing them with a PlayStation controller on the Intellivision Lives compilation that came out. Well, you guessed it, not too long ago I came across this title, so I decided to go ahead and feature it on this channel. But before we get too far into it, let's go ahead and see what kind of transpired between the end of the Intellivision's life cycle and how this game compilation came along. It has been almost 2 years since my Atari vs. Intellivision series. Since that time, it has been frequently pointed out to me that perhaps I would enjoy the Intellivision Lives compilation that was released on consoles such as the PlayStation 2. But to see how this compilation came about, let's go ahead and rewind the clock back to 1984.
Television because of those great games. His dad wants him to have the other video game because it's cheaper. Could you do something about the price?
Dear, what was his name? I think I have something that'll make your friend very happy. Intellivision 2. The people at Mattel Electronics have drastically reduced the size and price, but it plays the same great games. Your friend's father has no excuse now.
After suffering over $280 million in losses the previous year, Mattel Electronics laid off the rest of their staff in January of 1984, selling off the Intellivision brand that February. Former Mattel Electronics Senior Vice President of Marketing Terrence Valesky understood that although losses were huge, the demand for video games increased in 1983. Valesky found investors and purchased the rights to the Intellivision, the games, and inventory from Mattel for $20 million. A new company, Intellivision Incorporated, was formed, and by the end of 1984, Valesky bought out the other investors and changed the company's name to INTV Corporation. Under this new name, they continued to supply large toy stores and sold games direct through mail order. At first, they sold the existing inventory of games and Intellivision 2 systems. When the inventory of games sold out, they produced more, but without the Mattel name or unnecessary licenses on printed materials. To lower costs, the boxes, instructions, and overlays were produced at lower quality when compared to Mattel's version. In 1985, INTV Corporation introduced the INTV System 3, also branded as the Intellivision Super Pro system, using the same design as the original television model, but in black and silver. That same year, they also introduced two new games that were completed at Mattel but never released: Thunder Castle and World Championship Baseball. In 1986, they decided to start producing new games, starting with Super Pro Football, which is an update of Mattel NFL Football. INTV Corp also continued a relationship that Mattel had with Data East and produced all new titles such as Commando in 1987 and Body Slam Wrestling in 1988. Also in 87, they released Dig Dug. They also got into producing next-generation games with the production of Monster Truck Rally for the Nintendo Entertainment System in 1991. This was also released as Stadium Mud Buggies for Intellivision in 1989. Licensing agreements with Nintendo and Sega required INTV Corporation to discontinue the Intellivision in 1990. They ended up publishing 21 new Intellivision cartridges, bringing the Intellivision library to a total of 124 cartridges plus one compilation cartridge. With the discontinuation of the console, that would mark the end of general availability of Intellivision games for the next several years. In June of 1995, former Mattel Electronics programmers led by Keith Robinson started Blue Sky Rangers Intellivision website. Blue Sky Rangers was a nickname given to Mattel Electronics programmers in a TV Guide magazine article from an issue dated June 19, 1982. The website provided the history of Intellivision games and credits the programmers and artists. Though fans of the system enjoyed the website, many asked how they could play these games on their computer. Intellivision games became readily available again when Keith Robinson and Stephen Roney, both former Intellivision programmers at Mattel Electronics, obtained exclusive rights to the Intellivision and games in 1997. That year, they formed Intellivision Productions and made Intellivision for PC Volume 1 available as a free download. With this, Intellivision games could be played on a modern computer for the first time. The download included 3 Intellivision games and an MS-DOS Intellivision emulator that played original game code. It was followed by Volume 2 with another 3 games. In the year 2000s, the IntelliPack 3 download was available with another 4 Intellivision games and emulators for Windows and Macintosh. These games would get an official release on disc as Intellivision Lives and Intellivision Rocks in 1998 and 2001 respectively. These compilation CDs play the original game code through emulators, and together they have over 100 Intellivision games, including games that were never before released. Some games, however, could not be included due to the licensing. Others simply used different titles to avoid trademark names. Intellivision Lives made its first console appearance when it was published by Crave Entertainment for PlayStation 2 in 2003, and the following year on Xbox and GameCube. In the console versions, the games are accessed from a 3D overworld set in a 1980s pizza parlor environment, which always seems kind of strange to me because most of the time these games would be played at home and not in the arcade. However, it is sure to invoke that feeling of the 1980s when this console would have been out. One of the features of this disc is that they include programmer interviews and a history of Intellivision. Let's take a look at a few clips from these interviews.
Here I was, working for Mattel Toy Company. In the upper left-hand corner it says, Senior Systems Programmer. Design and develop handheld and video games. And I thought to myself, yeah? They're going to pay me to do this?
When you're preparing an operating system, it's nice if you have the sense for how the operating system is going to be used.
The part about Space Spartan I was happiest with was the maneuver language that I wrote. But basically what it would do is it would set up the formation. So you'd have the ships flying in little barrel rolls, or coming in from the side, or coming in from the top and looping around like this, or whatever maneuver they may do.
Gabriel came to me and said that he really wanted an abstract game, and I said, well, you know, kind of like what? And he said, well, that's just it. I want it completely abstract, totally unrelatable to anything, because it's kind of this game that's way out there. And now my kids sort of look at me and say, what were you thinking when you did this game?
These are a fascinating resource that I think is an excellent addition to this disc, no doubt inspired by the DVD special features, which would have been a new thing at the time of this game's release. So when you think about it, the Intellivision is actually a very unique console. Think about other consoles that are out at the time, such as the Atari. Those games have been re-released several times on multiple consoles after the death of Atari in the mid-1990s. That may be due in part to the fact that a lot of these games were designed to work with that very unique controller that other consoles would have a hard time replicating. However, in the PlayStation 2 version, you can use a PlayStation 2 controller, which I am very familiar with and I enjoy playing with, so I'm very interested to see how the PlayStation 2 controller works on these games. Let's go ahead and take a look. So as stated before, you start off in a 1980s style pizza parlor / arcade. This is kind of neat, but I would prefer a menu that I can get through quicker. And there will be no way that I can get through all the games on this compilation, but I'm just going to showcase a few of them that I tried out on here. I was very interested to try out B-17 Bomber, as I didn't have the IntelliVoice module when I tried out that game. B-17 Bomber. And I did have fun with this game, but it took me a little while to figure out. Luckily they include the game manuals, and that makes it a lot easier to figure out how to play these games. However, I also noticed that there was some background music playing that I didn't really appreciate, so I went ahead and found the menu to shut that off. Now that I got that out of the way, let's go ahead and try out some space games, as these were some of my favorite when I was playing the console. I decided to try out Astro Smash as this is a game I don't own on the original console. This game was released in 1981 and involves using a laser cannon to destroy falling meteors, bombs, and other targets. With more than 1 million copies sold, Astro Smash was one of the top 5 best-selling games on the Intellivision. In this game, the bulk of the targets are meteors, which come in 2 sizes and various colors. Both sizes fall vertically when entering the screen. Large meteors may be destroyed with a direct hit, or may be split into 2 smaller meteors, which fall diagonally in opposite directions. Small meteors are always destroyed with a single hit. The player must also shoot spinning bombs or spinners, which are white and come in 2 sizes. Each spinner emits a loud whistling sound, which gradually lowers in pitch as it approaches the ground. Guided missiles appear occasionally as white dots, making a pulsing sound. They may also fall diagonally towards the player's initial location, or track the laser cannon as it moves left or right. If the missile reaches the ground, it may disappear, or it may track left or right, and can only be avoided by entering hyperspace. The player loses a cannon each time it is hit by a falling meteor, guided missile, or basically anything else. Each target you manage to hit increases your score. However, hitting targets earlier awards more points. The game overall has 6 levels, each of which features an increased speed and scoring. Each level is represented by a differently colored background. Level 1 is black, Level 2 is blue, and so on. Overall, I did find this game fun and enjoyable, kinda reminding me of a faster-paced version of something like Space Invaders. Sometimes, after scoring so high in a game, you will unlock additional features within Intellivision Lives, and in this case it looks like I unlocked the Space Games commercial with George Plimpton.
New Intellivision space game Star Strike, with one of the most popular Atari games, Asteroid. Star Strike has moving images that make the game appear three-dimensional. Asteroids doesn't. And Star Strike features our most exciting visual effect, total destruction of a planet.
And speaking of Space Invaders, this is Space Armada, and if it looks familiar, it probably should. This game plays exactly like Space Invaders. This game is a faithful enough port of the game, and plays very well. This game definitely has better graphics than the Atari 2600 version. And, now that I'm playing it without the disc, I enjoyed the controls as well. And here is Space Battle. This is a game where you'll have the on-screen keypad active a lot because this game actually utilizes it quite a bit. This is also a game where you're going to have to leaf through the manual first to get a good feel about what this game is all about. I did get used to this game, but I didn't get very far in it because I'm not that good at it yet. You start out with this overhead view, and then you deploy your units out to encounter the enemies. Once you get close enough, you can enter into more of a first-person combat view and destroy the ships. Here's another game I enjoyed on the Intellivision. This is Space Hawk. The object of this game is to survive as long as possible while drifting in the middle of outer space. You're equipped with a rocket-powered spacesuit and a gas blaster for protection. I was trying to think of what game this reminds me of the most, and I can say it's probably like Asteroids. Your goal is essentially to take out all of the enemies on screen while avoiding all of the obstacles and the enemy's fire. Getting hit by anything or touching any of the objects results in a loss of life. And points are awarded whenever targets are destroyed, and lost whenever the player is destroyed or enters hyperspace. Overall, I did find this game enjoyable, and I much preferred the controls on the PlayStation 2 controller than on the original Intellivision. Here is another game that utilized the IntelliVoice synthesis module. This is Space Spartans. The object of this game is to survive as long as possible against a never-ending onslaught of alien enemies, while defending a set of starbases given at the start of the game. Again, this is one I am not very good at, so I'm not able to show a lot of footage from this game. I've only played Star Strike on the Intellivision micro console that I own, which also has a D-pad built into it. This game is probably the epitome of how the Intellivision's graphics are better than the Atari 2600's graphics. This is very evident in the pseudo 3D corridor that you're flying down that was inspired by the famous trench run in the 1977 film Star Wars. The player must drop bombs on alien weapon silos before Earth moves into range. Of course, if you fail to do so, then you see the awesome spectacle of the total destruction of a planet. Overall, this is probably up there in my top 10 favorite games on the Intellivision, and I definitely enjoy it here on this version rather than trying to struggle with the Intellivision controller. Moving away from space games, this is Frog Bog. In this game, a player controls a frog sitting on a lily pad, attempting to eat more flies than the other frog sitting across from him. This is one of the few games back in the day where if there was not a second player, the system would automatically take control of the other frog within a few seconds. It's hard to think of where games would be if we didn't have enemy AI, but that's how most of the games released in the early 1980s were shipped. But anyway, you have a limited amount of time basically to catch as many flies as you can, making sure you collect more than your opponent. At the end of the level, a firefly comes onto the screen carrying a "The End" message. When that happens, whoever has the most flies is the winner. I do really enjoy this game, but I feel that this one is best played with 2 players. Now, Sharp Shot is a game that I found a little confusing at first, because I didn't realize this was actually a compilation of 4 other games. Specifically marketed towards younger children, the object of this game is to score points by correctly timing shots at various targets. The 4 separate games are Football Passing, Space Gunner, Submarine, and Maze Shoot. Overall, I found this game a little uninteresting, but then again, I guess it was marketed towards kids younger than me. Now, I'm not really a big fan of older sports titles, but I did want to go in and try out some of the racing games on this console. I decided to skip auto racing since I've already tried that one, so let's try Motocross. This is a multiplayer racing game produced by Mattel in 1983. Each player controls a motocross bike in a race to the finish line. You can choose either normal or reverse direction, and gravity affects your gameplay, resulting in bikes that accelerate, skid, or jump realistically. Overall, the game is not too bad, but I'm not a huge fan of racing games that have a fixed perspective. So I had a similar experience with Mud Buggies, which was the other game on here, although I did notice that that one had an enemy AI that also followed me around the track. One limitation of gameplay, however, is that both cars must remain on screen at the same time, so you can never get too far ahead of your opponent. Moving on to some arcade-style games, this one is Snafu. So basically this is a snake-style game where you have to avoid running into someone else's wall. This is very similar to the opening game in the movie Tron, where they have the electronic motorcycles that create a wall behind them as they ride. This is a true battle royale, as whoever's left standing at the end of the level is the winner. I do enjoy the gameplay style, but again, I feel this is best played with 2 players. Moving on, this is Pinball, which, again, for the Intellivision, is a very impressive game. In the early 1980s, this would probably have been the most advanced video pinball game anyone had played up until that time. Unfortunately, I think for most gamers today, they would see the limitations of this game and not really find it as interesting. Now here's a more action-based game. This is Buzz Bombers. In this game, you play a can of bug spray trying to warm off swarms of bees. I like how you're not a player holding on to a can of bug spray, you are actually the can of bug spray yourself that had become sentient and decided you really hate bees. I mean, hey, it makes sense to me. But basically you play this game by firing shots of bee repellent that will turn the bee into a piece of honeycomb. The standard worker bees will fly left and right above the garden, reversing direction whenever they reach the edge of the screen or a piece of honeycomb. At the edge of the screen, the bee will drop one level closer to the garden. In later levels, killer bees will appear, which move much faster than regular bees and are unaffected by the honeycombs. If a regular bee is trapped between 2 obstacles, it will form a beehive, which is worth bonus points at the completion of the level. Overall, I think I had more fun playing this game than I thought I would have, and this is one I might actually try to collect for the original Intellivision if I find it out and about sometime. Next is Night Stalker, which is a top-down maze shooter designed and released for the Intellivision in 1982. The player controls a man trapped in a maze with no exits and many threats. Some natural, such as bats and spiders, and other artificial, more deadly in nature, such as robots. You start out in a bunker in the middle of the map, completely defenseless. A gun icon flashes in one of 5 random locations, which you must pick up to arm yourself. Each gun has 6 bullets. Once the ammunition has been exhausted, the gun icon will appear again somewhere else. This leaves the player defenseless as they have to work their way to the weapon icon without encountering any enemies. Next we'll have a look at Shark. This game was designed by Don Daglow with additional programming by Ji-Wen Sao, one of the first female programmers in the history of video games. In this game, the player is a fish who must eat smaller fishes in order to gain points and extra lives while avoiding enemies such as larger fishes, sharks, jellyfish, lobsters, and crabs. After eating a certain number of fish, the player's fish grows in size, and is able to eat a larger selection of fish. While larger, the player is a bit faster, however they are also less agile than the small fish and has a harder time avoiding enemies. I also ended up playing Thin Ice, as this was a game that I was curious to play, and wasn't too bad. Although I would recommend leafing through the manual just a little bit so you can get an idea of what you're supposed to do in this game. The last game we'll look at on here is Vectron. And I'm not going to explain a lot about this game, as this game was designed to be very abstract. Part of the fun about playing this game is figuring out what you're supposed to do. And even watching this on my game footage here, I'm actually at a loss for which character I actually am on the screen. Overall, a unique experience that kind of caps off what this console is kind of all about. Alright, so what are my thoughts on the Intellivision Lives compilation for the PlayStation 2? Well, I'm a little bit half and half divided on this. On the plus side, I love the controller a lot better than I do on the original Intellivision. My biggest problem with the original controller was the disc. The fact that we now have a D-pad is a step in the right direction. The only drawback to this is that even though we have a D-pad, we're actually lacking a lot of the buttons that would have been used on the keypad, so they resorted to putting an on-screen menu. This is actually a kind of ingenious thing that I wouldn't have thought of to make these games more compatible. And for the most part, it doesn't really get in the way. I will say, a lot of Intellivision games take a little bit of time to get used to before you can start getting good at it. You actually have to learn to play each game. Another drawback is that yes, even to play these games single player, sometimes it requires 2 controllers. And why not? Because the original Intellivision had 2 controllers built into the console. There was never going to be a time where you only had one. So in terms of making it compatible with the PlayStation 2 controller, I think they did the best job that could have been done. Another drawback that I see here is the game selection. As I stated before, to avoid licensing issues, they couldn't use any games that were licensed properties on this disc, unless they kind of redesigned them or changed the title. So games that I were expecting to be on here were not. There are several other games that they could have included on here that I think should have been, especially if gamers are not familiar with this console. They can find a game they are familiar with to kind of draw them into the console. So overall, I think this is a decent collection, and it's actually not a bad way to get people introduced to the Intellivision, because a lot of games that were very popular on the system are included on this disc. It doesn't include those licensed titles, and for some reason it also doesn't include like the Activision and is it iMagic or Imagic? It doesn't include those titles either. However, the sequel that was only released on PC, Intellivision Rocks, they would get the Activision and Imagic games. Overall, I would say that if you're a fan of the Intellivision, you're probably going to want to go for something that uses the original controller. Unfortunately, that kind of rules me out because I'm not a big fan of the controller. But for those of you that want to see how this game system works, I think the original system is a better way to go because then you can choose what games you want. They're not really too rare, at least not at the posting of this video, and you'll find some decent titles that you cannot get on this compilation or on the flashback console that was released. But anyway, that's just my opinion. What do you guys think of this compilation? Does it live up to the reputation the Intellivision built up in the 80s or not? Let me know what your guys' thoughts are in the comments below. I'd really like to see what your guys' take on it, especially those of you that grew up with the system. That's it, guys. That's about going to wrap it up for this video. Remember, if you like what you see, please hit that like and subscribe button. Share with a friend. You can reach out to me on my website or social media. Again, I want to thank you guys so much for watching, and stay tuned because I have more content coming. I'll see you guys next time. If you like this video and you'd like to help out with future projects on this channel, please consider supporting me on Patreon. Also, if you enjoy the content of this channel, please remember to click on this subscribe button. Again, I want to thank you guys so much for watching. If you'd like to see some of the content I've already done, feel free to click on some of the suggestions that are popping up on your screen. Otherwise, I'll see you next time.